All right. So we are now going live, and obviously I will be editing and whatever. All right, here we go. Welcome to the Black Men Rock Roundtable Discussion, where our intention is to engage Black men in a powerful, positive dialogue about issues and events that empower Black men to live extraordinary lives. I'm your host, Coach Michael Taylor. In this episode, we're discussing ways to deal with the different challenges emotionally and psychologically that men deal with on a daily basis. So this topic is called men's emotional healing. And the reason this topic is so important is because I believe we live in a culture that conditions men not to feel. And as a result, men struggle with identifying and expressing their emotions authentically. This causes a multiplicity of challenges for men, including failed relationships, senseless acts of violence, depression, and a host of addictive and destructive behaviors. Our goal is to bring awareness to this issue, and my hope is that this conversation sheds light on why it's so important for men to be able to express their emotions openly and honestly. And so at this time, I'd like to introduce my panelists and give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. So, Judge, would you begin?
Yes, Michael. My name is Judge Maddox. I am a New Warrior. I'm also a co-leader of the New Warrior Training Adventure, which is a men's transformational initiatory weekend. I also facilitate containers called Shadow Work, which gives people opportunity to look deeply at what works and what doesn't work for them. And I'm also a coach of that model. I'm a partner, a father, a grandfather, and what I like to think most of all, a teacher.
Thank you. And Ernest.
Yes, Michael. My name is Ernest Patterson. I'm the program manager of an adolescent program at Memorial Hermann Prevention and Recovery Center. I'm also a certified co-leader from the Mankind Project. I have a husband, daughters, and a father and a friend, and I believe in this work and really inspiring men to become better men. And I'm honored to just be in you men's presence tonight.
Thank you, Ernest. And Mr. Richard.
Hello, my name is Russell Richard. I'm a psychotherapist in clinical practice. I specialize in major life transitions and men's issues. Much of what I deal with people, the underlying aspects of most of the issues that people bring into my office have to do with emotions. So this is definitely a topic that I am immersed with constantly. As is the other two panelists, I'm involved in the Mankind Project as well, and I have led several weekends, and I'm also a practitioner of shadow work.
Thank you. Now, it is my belief that the three most difficult words for a man to say is "I need help," followed by "I don't know." Because as mentioned, as men, I believe we are conditioned in our society to disconnect from our emotions, and it is my belief that it drives a lot of our negative behaviors. And so for those of you who are listening or viewing this video right now, I want to begin first of all by just, when we talk about feelings and emotions, especially from a male perspective, it can actually be a little confusing because we may not be real clear on what feelings and emotions are. So I'd like to take this opportunity to give my panelists an opportunity to give their definition of emotions. And I want to start with Russell. Russell, how would you define emotions?
Well, you brought up a good point, Michael, between the feelings and emotions. We often use the terms interchangeably, but I've become accustomed to asking what's your emotion instead of what's your feeling. Because when I ask what is your feeling, people often say, well, I feel tired, or I feel hungry, or I feel sick. And we do feel that physically or physiologically, but when I'm asking the question, what do you feel, I'm typically asking for your emotion. And the way I teach this, and different people have different models, but I teach that there's 6 basic emotions: anger, sadness, fear, joy, shame, and guilt. And how I like to define emotions is that they are signals. Our emotions are signals that alert us to the fact that something in our environment needs some attention so that we can return to a place of harmony. And I guess just to clarify, I would say that more than all of the emotions, with the exception of happiness, because when we're in that space of happiness, then things are pretty harmonious and peaceful and productive. But with the other 5 emotions, there's usually an indication that something in our environment needs some attention. So essentially, our emotions are energy that comes up in response to situations and circumstances that alert us to some action that needs to be taken to restore us to a place of harmony.
Great definition. Judge, how would you define feelings/emotions?
I think Russell covered most of it as well as I could. I think it's important in that in our language that when we are asking the question or when we are making statements of "I feel," that I should be clear whether that feeling is a physical feeling, whether that feeling is an emotional feeling, or I think where we fall short in our communication is that we use the word feeling synonymously with our judgments and thoughts. And so if a person is saying, this is how I feel, I would like for them to also be clear whether they're talking about their emotions, whether they're talking about their physical body sensations, or whether they're talking about their judgments and and thoughts. And Russell laid it out pretty good in the basic emotions. We differ a little bit in the fact that he holds shame and guilt as primary emotions, and I hold shame and guilt as judgments based in fear. Um, and those points are not arguable with me and him. I think it's just an understanding that I have, an understanding that he has. I don't think we disagree with how they impact us. But that's my take on what the emotional literacy is about, is learning when we are talking about our emotions, whether we're talking about our physicality or whether we're talking about our thoughts and judgments.
Thank you. Ernest, would you like to interject your definition or add anything to that dialogue?
Yeah, just briefly, Michael. I think Russell and Judge did a masterful job in just really explaining emotions and feelings. But one thing for me, and Russell kind of alluded to it also, is that emotions is, to me, is just energy in motion. That is the energy in my body that I can feel that energy. Now, my personal belief is that my body knows what I'm feeling before my mind does. If I pay attention to what's going on in my body, that will lead me to a place, if I trust it and I believe in it, and what's really going on inside of me. And I just think that to be able to create some language for that, I don't believe they're good and bad. It's just they're emotions, and just to be aware and conscious of really what's going on inside of me.
Now, Neil Donald Walsh said something that I really loved when he started talking about emotions. And he said that emotions are the language of the soul, and they're our internal guidance system for navigating through life. And I really like that definition, and it really it's in alignment with what Russell was saying. And so now that we have an understanding of emotions, the next question that comes up is that the title of this topic is Men's Emotional Healing. So what I'd like to ask is, in your opinion, what is it that causes a man to begin disconnecting from his emotions in the first place? And let's start with you, Ernest. What are your thoughts around that?
Thank you, Michael. My thought around that, Michael, is that when a little boy, when a child is born into this world, you take a little boy maybe around the age of 4 or 5, and that little boy falls down and scrapes his knee. And that little boy begins to cry. And some of the elders that's around that little boy, or some of the older siblings, or even young men in their lives, and perhaps even the mom, and that little boy falls and begins to cry. And all of a sudden, he begins to hear the message that boys don't cry, men don't cry. And for a little boy to hear that boys don't cry or men don't cry, a 5-year-old is not a man. And so it's already confusing when that little boy hears that. And there's a plethora of different things that's said when that little boy falls down. And all of a sudden, that little boy begins to connect from their true essence of who they are, to experience those emotions. And all of a sudden, it's not safe for them, because what's been told is that if I get vulnerable and really express my emotions of sadness and fear, that for whatever reason that constitutes that I'm not a man, or I'm not a boy. And so I believe during that process, young boys began to grow up feeling unsafe to really express their emotions and feelings.
Judge, what's your thoughts on that?
I agree 100% with what Ernest just said, and to take that a step further, the whole society that we live in, the atmosphere, the television, the newspapers, all of the media is constantly telling young boys how to act, and those messages have very little to do with expressing themselves from an authentic emotional place. Those messages are telling them to man up. Those messages are telling them to be strong. Those messages are telling them not to cry. Those messages are telling them don't let people see you sweat. And every one of those messages are telling them not to be authentic. And when we are teaching our young men and women, when we're teaching our younger generations not to be authentic, we're also teaching them not to honor what Ernest was talking about, that message that's coming through our body, that message that you were talking about, the messages from the soul. Don't pay attention to those. Don't let people see you in that, because if they do, you will be weak. You will be labeled. You will be ostracized. You won't be one of us. And so we learn to not express ourselves. We learn to ignore or pretend not to have feelings.
Russell?
Yeah, I would agree with what everything that's been said so far. I would also add another element to that, and again, it goes back into this whole socialization piece, because essentially that's what Judge and Ernest are talking about, how little boys are socialized. At the same token, you have to take a look at what has been men's role in society. And men have been the more task-oriented gender, so to speak. It's up to men to go out and kill the buffalo and bring it back to the tribe. It's up to men to go out and fight the wars. You know, it's up to men to do. And you have your task-oriented styles of functioning in life, and you have your relational-oriented styles of functioning in life. And so historically, and I would also say stereotypically, men have been more in the task-oriented arena. And so when you're going out on the hunt, or when you're going out fighting the war, or when you're going out to make a living and to provide and do all the things that have been designated for men to do, emotions don't factor or have not factored very heavily into that. So I would say that's also another piece of that bigger picture of what causes men to be disconnected from their emotional experience. Now, I would like to say that because society has evolved into what it has evolved into, we are seeing a lot of shifting in terms of not only just men's roles, but the ability of men to be more balanced in terms of attending to tasks as well as attending to the more relational side of our living.
Yeah, and that leads me into the next segment here, is because there's a lot of emphasis now put on emotional intelligence. And from a male perspective, I think it's something that's definitely needed. And it's the reason why we're on this call right now, is because we're promoting this idea that it's okay for men to be in touch with their emotions. It's actually paramount to their success, their happiness in life, to be connected to their inner world. And so I'm curious to know, so I want you guys to share actually with the viewing audience. We're talking about emotions, and each of you have talked about your areas of expertise. But I'm sure there was a time in your life when maybe you weren't connected. I know from my own experience, I was completely disconnected, which I will go into later. But I wonder if you can explain or share, how did you get involved in dealing with your emotional life? And I'll start with you, Judge.
Wow, Micah, that's a very very good question. I got involved after being a member of a 12-step group that I became affiliated with. Before coming to this 12-step group, I had no real awareness that I had an emotional actually, I had a emotional commitment not to feel that I was even hiding from myself. Uh, and what I mean by that was I had an emotional commitment not to express my sadness, not to allow myself to be angry, uh, and to always seek nothing but the euphoric the euphoria that came with using drugs in an attempt to be happy. And because I was this big, strong, athletic guy who played football, I never ever wanted you to have the idea that I was afraid of anything. Um, so when I got to doing the 12-step work, I started to realize that there were a lot of things on an emotional scale that I was afraid to touch, to even get close to. One of the things that I was running from was the sadness and the grief of my brother's death. And in that, I was also running from the sadness and grief of losing or being separated, from my first child and my first divorce and my second divorce, and all of those emotional, impactful things that were happening to me. I wasn't giving myself permission to explore those, and what that caused in me was this, almost suicidal phase of my life, and as I came closer to wanting to end my life, something clicked, something said, wait a minute, what's really going on? And I started looking for some help. And the help that I got was start taking a look at the real emotional parts of myself. And it took years. It took years for me to begin to trust. It took years for me to begin to explore and to really see myself as an emotional being, and not just this plastic man.
Thank you for sharing that. Russell, would you share with us your experience?
For me, excuse me, for me, that's an ever-evolving process, is what comes to me in this moment. Obviously, in the field and profession that I'm in, the exposure to emotions and feelings came with studying to become a therapist. Um, it's a very kind of paradoxical experience I have, because on the one hand, I have always been very in touch with my emotions and my feelings, particularly sadness and grief. And on the other hand, I can be very disconnected from those feelings at the same time. So it's been an ever evolving process through first just studying to do the work that I do, and then doing my own personal work on myself. Um, it's all opened me up to what's going on internally, because I think that to be effective in this work that I do, that it requires me being connected to what's going on with my inner self as well. So it's a constant place of reflecting. It's a constant place of exploring, constantly asking myself the question: okay, what energy is inside of me right now? What am I really feeling right now? And getting clear on that. So it's an ongoing process.
Ernest, reflections?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Michael. I guess what really comes up for me um, that I'm really clear about is pain is an incredible motivator. And you know, I got to a point in my life where, you know, this kind of cliche is, but I got, you know, sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I know me that what I was really connected to was my anger. Uh, you know, I remember growing up as a child that that's the one thing, that's the emotion that really wasn't allowed in my home, and and so I suppressed it. But as I got older, it came out sideways. You know, I remember I have a brother that's 2 years older than I am, and I would hang out with him, and he really didn't like me hanging out with him because I would fight all his friends. And but I really wasn't angry at them. I was angry at home, and I just didn't have any outlets. And I played sports, but I didn't shut it off even after the sports, and that went into drug use, and and, and so I was really disconnected to my sadness and grief. And it wasn't until, you know, I got into recovery, and even in recovery, I was still disconnected. And I would really say that once I joined the Mankind Project, sitting in circles with men, and eventually I sat in circles with women also, that it was okay, that it was safe for me to express sadness. It was okay for me to express hurt, because the only thing, again, that I was really connected to was my anger. So I used anger for every emotion. And I had to grow. And like Russell said, it is an ongoing process, because I know how the emotions can get confused. And for me to have some clarity about, you know, where I'm at, what's going on with me in the present moment, that's an ongoing process for me. But it was, I wasn't willing to do the work until I was in enough pain. And I guess for me, uh, my what I like to call growing edge is to get to a place where I don't have to be in so much pain to want to do the work.
Yeah, yeah. Interestingly enough, for me, um, after my divorce, what I noticed is I had a difficult time creating relationships, connection. And there was this recurring theme with the women that I was involved with, which was, you're not emotionally available. And I remember trying to figure that out in my head, what the heck does that mean? What? I'm not emotionally available. I'm a nice guy. I thought, I was a good guy and loyal and all of those things, fun to be with, but not emotionally available? Well, I can see now in retrospect the reason they were saying that was true. I was completely disconnected from my inner self, my inner world. I did not know how to speak from my heart, to open my heart, to trust in relationship. And that's how I began my journey, because I got, like you, Ernest, I got sick and tired of being sick and tired of relationships not working out. And so it was really important for me, made a commitment that if I didn't do anything else in my life, I was going to figure out how to create a relationship that worked. And it took a lot of work. I mean, it took a lot of work. But ultimately, I did my emotional healing work, and I have now created a 12-year marriage that's just wonderful. It works for me on all levels, and I couldn't have been able to say this some 15, 20 years ago when I started this process, because I was completely disconnected from my emotions. So for those who are viewing this, my invitation is for you to stop for a moment and just sort of take a look at your life and ask yourself, how are your relationships right now? Are they loving and connected and fulfilling? Or are they filled with drama and anger, frustration, and fighting? Because they all have at their root cause, if they're negative, emotional. There's something emotional going on that we have to be willing to look at if we want to create great relationships. And so I know that as men, we struggle with relationships primarily because we're disconnected from our emotions. And it's important that we have this conversation and begin sharing with each other the that we've learned that have supported us, so that you, the viewer, possibly can take action if you choose, so that you can do your own emotional healing work. So with that said, we talk about emotional intelligence, and I'm wondering now if you can stop and think back that as you started doing this work, and I wonder if you can share a story maybe of how not being connected to your emotions affected your professional life. And I'll actually begin with this conversation, because this is for me what I found. Most of my life at an early age, I was very, very successful. And people would see Michael Taylor and they would say, man, that guy's got it all together. But the fact was, I was in so much pain that success was like a drug for me. It allowed me to feel good about myself, because when people would see all these things I accomplished, and they would congratulate me and acknowledge me and say, man, you're such a good guy. But the truth was, I was actually driven by the feeling of shame. I had this deep sense of something's wrong with me, so by being successful, I tried to negate that feeling. And it wasn't until I started doing my work, my inner emotional work, that I realized and recognized that first and foremost, I don't have to accomplish anything to be loved. I can just be me. And trust me, that was a huge burden off of my back when I started doing this work, to come to that realization. Do anything. I just have to learn how to love and accept myself. But in my work context, most of my success was driven by emotion. And when I say negative, I'm not saying bad. So as you're watching this, we must understand that emotions are neither good nor bad. There are what I'll call positive or negative. And so for me, that negative experience, that negative feeling of shame, drove me to continue to bring more negative experiences into my life, because it was an experience. It was a negative. By resolving and healing that negative experience, I moved to more positive experiences in my work life. Hopefully that clicked. So I wanted to know, Russell, let's start with you. Can you think of a time in your work life where your work life was affected by your inability to express your emotions?
Well, I think I would answer that question in the reverse. That how my work life is enhanced with the more work I've done to become emotionally intelligent and to become emotionally aware. Because I think that's the first step to emotional intelligence is the awareness and being able to put a label on this energy that's going on inside of me. And then also through the work that I've done, kind of understanding what some of the roots of that is. Because all of our emotions are triggered by a particular event or circumstance. And oftentimes, the emotion that's triggered by that event or circumstance goes back a lot further than just what's going on right now. And so, in being able to utilize that as information, if you will, to give me insight into some things that need to be resolved within myself, and actually doing that work, it frees me up and it opens me up for greater clarity in presence with people that I'm working with. So doing the work that I've done to become more emotionally intelligent has enhanced my work over the years.
Okay, thank you for that. So what are your thoughts on that? In terms of work and how doing your inner work has helped your work, or some experiences where it affected your work negatively?
Is that me, Michael, or?
Yes, for you, Ernest.
Right. Okay, good. Well, I was thinking about the last job I had at another facility, and I would get these awards as the nice guy, and so I would kind of post them on my wall, and what I recognized about myself, and I was talking to a guy one day, and he shared with me, what's that about? And me having that, I like to call it this pseudo persona that I'm the nice guy all the time, and so that's kind of that mask that I wore, and so I wanted people to like me, and so I would not speak my truth, and even though underneath that there was some frustration and anger, I didn't trust that, and so I would just say I'm fine, I'm okay, and I'm the nice guy, and that really hurt me, and because I really wasn't being authentic. And so as I continued to grow and with my emotional intelligence, it gave me the confidence to be able to say, this is not right, to really kind of set a boundary. And when I was triggered, because what I know is that any event that happens in my life doesn't have any meaning to it until I give it a meaning. And so, from that place, I could speak to it. I mean, I've grown to a place in my life now that I can sit with someone. If something's not right, I don't think it's right, that I can share it and not come from a place of fear that, well, they're not going to like me anymore. And the risk is they might not. But I'm willing to step into that today as opposed to in the past.
Thank you. Judge, any thoughts?
Well, Michael, I have lots of thoughts. When I think about, I don't know if it's so much my professional life as in growing up, for a child to be angry or show anger, and where I grew up was just not something that was going to be accepted at all. of course, until I found sports. And after I found sports, and football and basketball especially, I could channel that energy of that anger into my play. And I think about that as I watch these professional athletes and pro athletes and college athletes today, as to how many of them are taking, the energy that they get from an emotion like anger, and channel that into being the aggressive, the spot on the ball, the person who is always, focused on the task at hand. And I believe that once I stopped playing sports, that anger that I could channel so easily in sports had nowhere to go. And it when I didn't have anywhere to go, it affected how I showed up in the workplaces. Because when I got angry in the workplaces, after, especially if I had been holding it in for some time, it was going to come out sideways, and I was going to say something or do something that was going to either get me fired or get me put on the list of people to pay attention to look out for, because that kind of person would hurt you. I was the kind of person that would hurt you when I stopped playing sports, because I had nowhere for that anger to go.
Wow. And so the reason that I brought up how our lack of emotional intelligence affects our relationships and from a male perspective, when you have not done this work, it can be a little confusing. I know that when I first started, I felt so disconnected when I listened to people talk about their emotions, because I was so disconnected. So thank you, men, for sharing those stories, because I think it will help men kind of grasp where we're coming from when we start talking about emotions. And so with that said, I want to talk about, I think is extremely important. It's been said that all addictive behaviors have at their core an unresolved emotional conflict. And so we have a lot of men out there who are dealing with addictions, and obviously there's lots of different types of addictions out there, but until we can challenge men to deal with their emotions, it's difficult, if not impossible, for them to do those addictions. So Ernest, I'm wondering if you can briefly speak to how that unresolved emotional conflict can drive those addictive behaviors.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Just my experience, even today, working with young males and young girls with issues with chemical dependency and substance abuse, is that a couple of things happen. Either they have this kind of inflated emotions where they just come gushing out, or they have kind of deflated where they have a difficult time emoting altogether. And what I notice is that they don't have a real clear indication of what they're experiencing on the inside. I mean, it's really confusing for them. And a lot of times they just don't want to feel at all. I mean, it comes from a family dynamic where there's a lot of trauma, physical, sexual abuse, and they don't know how to deal with that. They don't know what they should, even give it a name, what they're feeling. And so what they do to really deal with that is to abuse drugs. And they will continue that cycle, because what it does, it gives them some temporary relief. And after it gives them that temporary relief, they'll continue to do it over and over, because they have experienced some relief from the pain or the frustration that they just want to numb out. And that's really how the addiction sets in, because once they continue to do that for relief, I like to say that, all of them say, well, I'll never cross that line. Well, what happens is that the line crosses them before they even know it.
Russell, give us some insights in terms of addictive behaviors and not being able or connected to your emotions.
I think Ernest touched on it very, very well. What I've seen with clients, people who struggle with addiction, is that the emotions are overwhelming and they're looking for relief. They're, in the drugs or whatever the mechanism of addiction is a way to get some sort of relief. And the emotions become uncomfortable. So while the drug or the work or the exercise or whatever provides some sort of relief, the root of the problem is never dealt with. And I often like to think of recovery in terms of you learn how to stop using the drug or the substance or whatever it is. And then there's the deeper work, which is what is the unresolved issue that I haven't been able to get to. And so again, as I said earlier, our emotions are a signal. And if we can stay with that signal long enough and ask the right question, okay, I'm feeling this, it's overwhelming me, it's causing me a lot of pain. What is this trying to tell me? What is this pointing me towards that new feeling? But a lot of times when we have so many traumatic issues or painful things that's happened in our lives that have gone unresolved, whenever anything triggers an emotion, we start to feel the full range of all of that, and at that point we're just looking for relief. And so that's where addictive behavior comes in.
Okay. Judge, any thoughts on addictive behaviors and the emotional conflict that's driving them?
Well, one of the things I've been learning is the concept that most addictive behaviors grow out of a message that I carry or that I carried, which says that I don't love right. And so if I have the belief, that internalized message of not loving right, then how am I ever going to be in any kind of relationship? Whether I'm not just talking about romantic relationships, but I'm talking about relationship with family, relationship with friends, relationship with coworkers, relationship with the stranger that I meet on the bus. If there's something inside of me that I have internalized, some message that I've taken on that says I don't love right, then what happens to me is then, I want to become invisible. I want to become, as I think Russell said it, I want to get numb and have no emotional connection at all. I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be sad. I don't want to be afraid. I don't even want to feel. I and that's really what happens when I start, using these chemical, what I want to call substitutions for emotions. When I start taking the chemical in order to amp up my feeling, amp up my feeling about myself, my belief about myself, then now I'm okay. And I'm okay because nothing can hurt me. I'm okay because I don't care about anybody else. I'm okay, and I'm really not. And that's what I don't want to be able to hear anymore. I don't want to hear that message that says, I don't love right. Because if I hear that, if I tell myself that one more time, then I don't want to exist. And that's really what addictions are really all about. It is that part of me that no longer wants to be. That part of me that no longer wants to be human, to have the human experience of emotion, because that is the human experience. That is my soul, as you said, Michael, speaking out to me. when my emotions of sadness, my emotions of anger, my emotions of joy, my fear, my guilt and my shame, when I take that away, then I'm not wanting to be human anymore. I don't even want to exist, and I'm afraid to even admit that. And the drugs keep me from doing that. The drugs keep me from having that awareness. The addiction keeps me from doing that. And I'm saying the drug because the drug doesn't have to be a chemical. It could be shopping. It could be gambling. It could be you name 100,000 things that we do that are obsessive to keep the emotions at bay.
Right. Right. So now we've talked a little bit about emotions, and hopefully, as you're watching this of possibly needing or wanting to address your emotional challenges that you may have. So I'd like to now move into, so what can we do to help us heal that emotional conflict that may be going on inside of us? So I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to share what are some things that a person can do that supports them in moving through the emotional conflict. So Russell, I'll begin with you.
Well, I think even before action starts, the one thing to be mindful of is that dealing with emotions won't kill you. I think that people often have this idea that if I go here, that the world's going to stop spinning, we're all going to go flying off into space or something. So the first thing is to realize that embracing this part of our humanity is not going to hurt us. It might be uncomfortable, but the question to ask then is, am I not uncomfortable anyway? So so that's the first thing, is realizing that if I begin to open myself up to being more connected to this experience of mine, whatever that is, it may be uncomfortable, but there's benefit in doing so. In terms of action steps to take, obviously, doing what I do for a living, naturally I would say there are many different professionals that can help people begin to have that conversation, explore their emotions, and come to a better understanding of what they are. As I said in the beginning, that's part of one of the core elements of my work is helping people to identify what those feelings are, put a label on them. And the beauty of, or what I think emotional intelligence is all about, is how do you harness that energy and be able to channel it in a way that's going to be effective for you. And that's really what it's all about. Because these energies that come up in us are there for a reason. And they can harm us or hurt us. We have control over how we can use these energies, and I can guarantee you these energies can be channeled for your success in your life. So naturally, psychotherapy is certainly something someone could do. I know all of us have attended many different workshops and seminars, retreats. There are a variety of mechanisms out there to be of assistance. There's no shortage of books on the subject. I know, Michael, you're an avid reader. So those are just some starting points. And that will open up an entire world. I know in beginning the work that I did, in particular with the Mankind Project, I'm amazed at all of the resources that are in my life now that came as a result of taking that one tiny step.
Yeah. And I have to reiterate the importance of, especially as men, the willingness to simply seek support. We have such a negative stigma in our society about men asking for help that, men are literally dying because they're afraid to simply say, I need help. And we have to change that conversation. We must make it okay for men to recognize that it is absolutely okay to say, I need help. And so, Russell, you hit the nail on the head. It may begin with simply making a commitment to just going to therapy and just talking to someone about it. It may not be therapy. It may be someone in your church. But just being acknowledge that there's something going on that you can't handle at this moment. It's important that men know that there are resources available. And that's why I'm doing this program. I want men to know that there are resources available. That's why we're having this conversation. Russ, I'm sorry, Judge, what are your any thoughts, any ideas of how does a person start this healing process?
Michael, you know, the very first step of every 12-step program I've ever been a part of starts with the acceptance. The acceptance of the fact that, you know, there is something really wrong with me, and, you know, that my life right now is not going, you know, the way it could in its most glorious form. So something is wrong, and my life is not working. But once I admit to that, then I'm open to everything that Russell was talking about. But I have to start with recognizing that something is wrong. I have to start with recognizing that it's not working. I have to start with recognizing, as you said, I need help. All right, and once we can do that, and begin to remove those what I would call debilitating patterns of behavior, you know, Russell said it again. Then that's when the flood of emotions are going to come, and when the flood of emotions is going to come, I need to be ready to accept the help of others. You know, so you know I think that's the most important thing, is to recognize that my life is not working, recognize I need help, and then, you know, stop doing all of the things, you know, that get me to that place of being, you know, emotionalist, or in that place of not owning what my emotional state is. Because once I start owning what my emotional state is, I can start looking at the impact of holding on to that emotional state. You know, it was once said to me that every emotional experience that I have, every emotional, you know, flow that I have, it's all cyclical. It's going to start and it's going to end. And usually from the beginning of the pattern to the end of the pattern, it is about 6 seconds, unless I decide to hold on to it, unless I cling to that emotion. If I cling to it, then it really begins debilitating to me. So the thing I would want people to know is that, you know, emotions are going to come, they're going to go, and I get to choose whether to hold on to them or not. And I only learned that by working with others. I only learned that by asking for help. I only learned that when I was willing to take the steps to allow other people to show me what they knew, things that I didn't know.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you. Ernest, your thoughts on where or what a person can do to begin that emotional healing process?
Yeah, it's just a lot of really incredible things have been said already, and you know, I don't want to just kind of echo the same things, but I do want to say that I think it was you, Michael, that talked about how the emotions is really just a guidance system to see whether we're on the right path or not. And I think for me, I can only see so far. In front of me, I can, you know, my peripheral, I can see okay, but I can only see so far, and I need other people in my life to see my blind spots. And once I can get feedback from other people, to give it a voice, whatever is going on with me, to give it a voice, it seems to take the power away from it. And what I know today is that, whatever I'm going through, even if I'm in a lot of pain, that it's not going to kill me. At one time, I thought I was probably going to die. And once I realized it's not going to kill me, that's how I grow. That's how it helps me grow, because the next time, because there will be a next time, when I go through that experience, I can reflect back on how I got through it the last time and say, well, that didn't really kill me the last time, and I'm sure I can get beyond that also. So it's personal experience, being able to go through it. Also, you talked about, workshops and churches, and and also, join in different organizations, because this is ongoing. It's not something that you do one time or that I do one time and that's it. It's continuous, and being committed to it, because if I'm not committed to it, it's difficult for me to continue growing. And lastly, I want to say this, because I truly believe that there is a spiritual solution to all problems. And being able to kind of reconnect with that divinity, or that the essence of who I am, the core of who I am, I think that will help me to grow and get me back in touch with my true essence. And to me, that true essence is love. And if I'm able to connect with something greater than me, or no name, or some type of belief system that can help guide me, it can reconnect me to my divinity.
Well said. Well said. So, emotional healing is a complex topic. I wanted to use this opportunity to have some men share their experiences, so that as you're watching this, hopefully there was something that was said that will trigger you to look within and ask yourself some questions about whether or not there's some emotional healing that needs to take place within you. This, as mentioned, is an ongoing conversation when we start talking about healing. But it all begins with the first step. It all begins with your willingness to say, I need help. And once you do that, then I know that you'll be guided along the path that will take you wherever you need to go. And so Black Men Rock is a resource that's designed to provide you with some insights and information to live extraordinary lives. And this conversation, I hope, will be an important one that you will really pay attention to. Because these men and myself, we've been doing this work for a pretty long time. And again, the insights that we're sharing is primarily based on our own personal experience. We're not claiming to be experts or to have all the answers. But what we do have is experience and a commitment to empowering you to live an extraordinary life. So, with that said, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for participating in this conversation, this roundtable about men's emotional healing. And I want to give each of you an opportunity right now, as we close, to share a little inspiration, if you will, to the man or woman who's watching this video and maybe thinking, there's something to that, and so whatever is on your spirit to share, I just want to give you an opportunity to close with some words of wisdom. So I'll start with you, Judge.
Thank you, Michael. So if you're out there watching, what I'd like for you to take with you is that that greater essence that I am, that Ernest talked about, that thing that he called love, is inside of you, and that it is a guiding light for you to follow. So my hope for you is that you're ready. My hope for you is that you want to be the best you that you can be. My hope for you is that you want healing for yourself and the world. And if you start with the emotional healing of yourself, then the world can only be a better place.
Thank you, Judge. Ernest.
Mm. Yes, Michael, and thank you, Judge. I guess what I want to leave the audience with is, for me, one of the truest forms of humility is for me to know that I don't know. And if I be in that place of knowing that I don't know, I'm in a place of learning and I can be taught. And lastly, is that this work that we do is what I've realized, that nothing on the outside is going to sustain me, sustain my joy, sustain my happiness. It's nothing on the outside that's going to sustain that, because it's fleeting. It's not going to last long. Sometimes it perishes even with the use of it. And it's from the inside that if I'm able to connect with my joy, my happiness and peace, if I'm able to really grow from the inside, regardless of what happened on the outside, I'll have a reasonable amount of joy and peace in my life.
Thank you, Ernest. Russell.
Okay, I guess I'm thinking about something that I said several years ago as it relates to our emotions. And I may not do that justice, but it's the idea that this whole experience that we are in is an experience of love. It's all about love. And so if I'm angry, then the love that this experience has for me is somehow blocked. If I'm sad, then I've somehow lost that love. And if I'm in a place of fear, then I somehow fear that the love I have will be lost, and I may not get it back. And if I'm in a place of shame or guilt, then there's something I've done, or there's something about me that causes me to be unlovable. And so all of our emotions are guiding posts back to love. Because if we can understand that this whole experience is about love, and that I am love, and that you are love, and that we were all created out of love, all of our emotions are there to help direct us back to that love and that experience that we're all here to partake in and enjoy. And one final note that I often tell people is that this life is far too complex, it's far too big, and it's far too greater than we are as individual beings to do alone. So rely on your support. And if you don't have support, find support. It's out there, I can assure you. You men are a testament to that in my life. And because things will come that cause us to get angry, sad, and scared, and hurt. And we have to have safe places and safe people to go to deal with that. Because it's too much for any one person to bear alone. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just close by, actually I want to close by simply saying, if you're watching this, no matter what the circumstances are, you are not alone. There are people out there that will support you. There are people out there who will give a helping hand. You know, it's been said that no man is an island. So we're not separated. We're all connected. We want to stay connected. We want to become aware of our connectedness. And that is the intention of Black Men Rock. Is to be a resource that supports and inspires you to live an extraordinary life. But you've got to be willing to connect. you've got to be willing to take the steps necessary so that your life becomes the life that I know you're capable of living. So, with that said, I just want to thank my panelists for joining me in this important topic. Know that 1 hour just isn't long enough to go deeply enough, but I think it provided the audience with some insights that can support them in living an extraordinary life. So let me just say thank you. I honor each of you men for participating. And this has been another episode of the Black Men Rock Roundtable Discussion. I'm your host, Coach Michael Taylor, and we'll see you next episode. Take care.